The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Episcopal Church in Westfield, Connecticut, casting rainbow patterns across the mahogany pews. Michael Harrison adjusted his black bow tie for the 5th time in 10 minutes, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at his reflection in the sacristy mirror. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Tom laughed, straightening his younger brother's collar. At 28, Tom still carried the easy confidence that had made him popular in high school, now channeled into his work as a detective with the Westfield Police Department. "Just nervous," Michael forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, a haunted look that hadn't been there 3 months ago. "Big day, you know? The biggest?" Tom studied his brother's face with the keen observation skills that made him good at his job. "Sarah's perfect for you, Mike. Mum would have loved her." Michael's throat tightened. Their mother had passed 2 years ago, never getting to meet Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had brought light back into Michael's world after years of focusing solely on building his financial consulting firm. Sarah, with her gentle laugh and fierce intelligence, had made him believe in the possibility of a future beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. "She would have," Michael whispered, thinking about how his mother always told him that honesty was the foundation of any lasting relationship. The irony twisted in his gut like a knife. Outside, guests were beginning to arrive at the church. The Mitchell family had spared no expense. White roses and baby's breath adorned every available surface, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Rebecca Mitchell, Sarah's mother, moved through the space like a general commanding troops, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her navy dress immaculate despite the Connecticut humidity. "The photographer needs you and Michael for some pre-ceremony shots," she informed Tom, with the efficiency that had made her one of Hartford's most successful real estate developers. Her sharp blue eyes, so much like Sarah's, seemed to see everything, including the slight pallor in Michael's complexion that foundation couldn't quite hide. In the bridal suite across the church courtyard, Sarah Mitchell sat in a cloud of ivory silk and antique lace, her grandmother's pearls gleaming against her collarbone. Her best friend and maid of honor, Jessica Chen, carefully arranged the cathedral-length veil while Sarah stared out the window toward the main church. "You're glowing," Jessica said, stepping back to admire her handiwork, "though you look a little pale. Pre-wedding jitters." Sarah touched her stomach absently. Something like that. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Michael, about the positive pregnancy test she'd taken 3 days ago. She'd planned to surprise him during their honeymoon in Tuscany, imagining his face when she told him they were going to be parents. "He loves you so much, Sarah," Jessica continued, unaware of her friend's secret. "I've never seen Michael look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon." Sarah smiled, remembering their first date 18 months ago. Michael had taken her to a small Italian restaurant in Hartford, and they talked until the owner politely informed them they were closing. He'd been charming, successful, everything her mother had hoped she'd find, but more than that, he'd been kind. Genuinely, deeply kind in a way that had made her trust him completely. If only she knew that at that very moment, across the courtyard, Michael was receiving a text message that would shatter the perfect morning into irreparable pieces. The message was from David Chen, his business partner and Jessica's older brother. "Remember what we discussed. Smile for the cameras, Michael. Your bride's family has no idea what kind of man she's really marrying, yet." Michael's hands shook as he deleted the message, his perfect wedding day suddenly feeling like a beautifully decorated cage closing around him. 3 months earlier, Michael had walked into his office at Harrison & Chen Financial Consulting to find David hunched over his computer, frantically typing while sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Working late again?" Michael had asked, setting his coffee on his desk. Their partnership had been built on mutual respect. David's aggressive sales tactics balanced perfectly with Michael's methodical approach to financial planning. David had slammed his laptop shut so quickly that Michael paused, just catching up on some client portfolios, but Michael had noticed the banking software on David's screen wasn't their usual client management system. It looked like something designed for international transfers, the kind of complex, layered transactions that legitimate businesses rarely needed. Over the following weeks, Michael began noticing irregularities, large cash deposits appearing in their business account with vague explanations, new clients who paid significant fees but never seemed to need actual financial advice. David's suddenly expensive tastes, a new BMW, a Rolex, designer suits that cost more than Michael's monthly mortgage. The truth had revealed itself on a rainy Tuesday in March. Michael had arrived early to prepare for a meeting with the Westfield Community Bank about expanding their small business loan, only to find David's office door ajar and voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "The money needs to be cleaned by Friday," David was saying to someone Michael couldn't see. "My partner doesn't know anything about this side of the business, and it needs to stay that way." "Your partner's the one with the clean reputation," an unfamiliar voice had responded. "Harrison's name is on everything. If this goes south, he's going down with you whether he knows about it or not." Michael had pressed himself against the hallway wall, his heart hammering as the pieces fell into place. The mysterious clients weren't seeking financial advice. They were paying Harrison and Chen to launder money through a complex web of investment accounts and shell companies that David had created using Michael's credentials and digital signature. When the unknown visitor left, Michael had confronted David directly. The conversation had started as a heated argument, but quickly devolved into something much darker. "You can't just walk away from this, Mike," David had said, his usual charm replaced by something cold and calculating. "Your signature is on every document. Your licenses authorized every transaction. Even if you didn't know, you're legally responsible for everything that's happened. I'll go to the police. I'll explain." "You'll explain what? That your business partner used your credentials to commit federal crimes and you never noticed? Do you think Sarah's family will stand by you when the FBI freezes all your assets? Do you think the woman who values honesty above everything else will marry a man who's either a criminal or too incompetent to notice his own business was being used for money laundering?" The trap had been perfect. David had manipulated their partnership agreement, their shared business accounts, and Michael's trust to create a situation where exposing the truth would destroy everything Michael had worked for and everyone he loved. Now, standing in his wedding tuxedo with his brother, adjusting his boutonniere, Michael felt the weight of those 3 months of silence pressing down on his chest like a physical force. Every smile he'd given Sarah had been a lie. Every promise about their future together had been built on a foundation that was about to crumble. "You ready for this?" Tom asked, checking his watch. 15 minutes until showtime." Michael looked at his reflection one final time. The man staring back at him looked successful, confident, ready to marry the woman of his dreams. But behind his eyes lurked the truth that would soon destroy everything, a secret so devastating that even now, minutes before his wedding, he couldn't find the strength to speak it aloud. The church bells began to chime, their melodious toll marking the beginning of what should have been the happiest day of his life. The wedding march filled St. Augustine's as 200 guests rose to their feet. Michael took his position at the altar beside Reverend Patricia Williams, a family friend who had known Sarah since childhood. His best man Tom stood behind him, while David Chen took his place as one of the groomsmen, his smile as perfectly crafted as his boutonniere. Sarah appeared at the back of the church on her father's arm, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. Even drowning in guilt and fear, he couldn't deny that she was radiant. The antique lace dress, passed down through 3 generations of Mitchell women, transformed her into something ethereal. Her smile, when she caught sight of him at the altar, was so full of pure joy that Michael felt his composure crack. James Mitchell, Sarah's father, walked with the measured pace of a man accustomed to important moments. As the retired CEO of a regional manufacturing company, he'd built his reputation on steady leadership and unshakable integrity, values that had clearly shaped his daughter. When they reached the altar, He lifted Sarah's veil to kiss her cheek, then turned to Michael with eyes that held both welcome and warning. "Take care of my girl," James whispered as he placed Sarah's hand in Michael's. "I promise," Michael replied, the words feeling like glass in his throat. Reverend Williams opened her worn prayer book, her voice carrying the warm authority of someone who had officiated hundreds of weddings. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this community to witness and bless the union of Michael James Harrison and Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell in holy matrimony." Michael tried to focus on the familiar words, but his attention kept drifting to David, whose presence felt like a ticking bomb in the front row. Every few minutes, David would catch Michael's eye and offer an encouraging nod, a gesture that looked supportive to everyone else, but felt like a reminder of the sword hanging over Michael's head. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly or inadvisedly," Reverend Williams continued, "but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." The word reverently hit Michael like a physical blow. There was nothing reverent about the lies he was building his marriage on. Every vow he was about to make would be tainted by the deception he carried. In the second row, Rebecca Mitchell dabbed her eyes with the embroidered handkerchief, overcome with emotion at seeing her daughter find the happiness that had sometimes seemed elusive during Sarah's focused pursuit of her teaching career. She'd initially been skeptical of Michael. Successful men often made unreliable husbands, in her experience, but he'd won her over with his obvious devotion to Sarah and his respectful treatment of their family traditions. "The vows you are about to make are a sacred promise," Reverend Williams said, turning to face Michael directly. "They represent your commitment to honesty, faithfulness, and mutual support through whatever challenges life may bring." Michael felt sweat forming under his collar despite the morning coolness. Behind him, Tom shifted slightly, and Michael wondered if his brother's detective instincts were picking up on his distress. "Michael," Reverend Williams prompted, "do you take Sarah to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love, honor, and cherish her, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, in good times and bad, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only unto her for as long as you both shall live?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Michael looked into Sarah's eyes, seeing complete trust and boundless love reflected there. She believed in him absolutely, believed in the man she thought he was, rather than the compromised fraud he'd become. "I do," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Sarah's turn came next, and her voice rang clear and strong through the sanctuary. "I do," she promised, meaning every word with the fierce sincerity that had first attracted Michael to her. The exchange of rings followed, each gold band blessed and slipped into place with trembling fingers. Sarah's hands were steady. She was marrying her best friend, the man who made her laugh and held her during difficult days at school. Michael's hands shook slightly as he repeated the ancient words, "With this ring I thee wed." As they moved toward the final pronouncement, Michael caught sight of a figure in the back of the church that made his blood turn to ice. Detective Rodriguez from the Hartford Financial Crimes Unit sat in the last pew, his presence subtle but unmistakable to someone living with guilty knowledge. David had noticed too, his confident smile faltering for just a moment before snapping back into place. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Williams announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Michael leaned forward and kissed Sarah softly, tasting salt from tears he hadn't realized were falling. The congregation erupted in applause, but all he could hear was the thundering of his own heartbeat and David's whispered words from 3 months ago. "Your partner's the one with the clean reputation. If this goes south, he's going down with you." As rice and rose petals filled the air outside the church, Michael Harrison smiled for the cameras, his new wife glowing beside him, completely unaware that their marriage had begun with the biggest lie of his life. The Westfield Country Club's ballroom had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linens, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and eucalyptus that filled the room with subtle fragrance. The head table overlooked the dance floor, where Sarah and Michael would share their first dance in less than an hour. Michael loosened his bow tie slightly as he made his way through the cocktail hour, accepting congratulations from family friends, business associates, and college roommates who had traveled from across New England for the celebration. Each handshake and backpat felt like another weight added to his chest. "Beautiful ceremony," said Richard Crawford, a client whose retirement portfolio Michael had been managing for 3 years. "You've got yourself a gem there, Michael. Sarah's been a godsend for our youngest daughter, pulled her through advanced calculus when we thought she'd have to repeat her senior year." Michael forced a smile. "She's amazing with her students. Teaching is her calling." What he didn't mention was that Sarah's teaching salary, while respectable, would never support the lifestyle they'd built together. The house in Westfield's historic district, the European honeymoon, the engagement ring that had required him to dip into business funds. All of it depended on the income from Harrison and Chen Financial Consulting. Income that was about to disappear when David's money laundering scheme inevitably collapsed. Across the room, Sarah moved gracefully between groups of guests, radiant in her reception dress, a sleek sheath of champagne silk that had been her grandmother's suggestion. She was deep in conversation with her college sorority sisters when Jessica Chen approached Michael, champagne flute in hand. "Your brother's quite the charmer," Jessica said, nodding toward Tom, who was entertaining a group of Sarah's cousins with stories from his police work. "Single, successful, good-looking. I might have to ask Sarah to set us up." Michael's stomach clenched. Jessica was David's sister, completely innocent of her brother's criminal activities. The thought of her potentially becoming involved with Tom, only to have her brother's crimes eventually destroy whatever relationship might develop, made Michael feel physically ill. "Jessica, can I ask you something?" Michael said carefully. "How well do you really know your brother's business activities?" She looked puzzled. "David's work? Not very well, honestly. I know he's done incredibly well for himself. Much better than any of us expected when he was struggling through business school." "Why?" Before Michael could respond, David appeared at his elbow, as if summoned by the mention of his name. "Michael, there's someone I'd like you to meet," David said smoothly, his hand on Michael's shoulder feeling more like a restraint than a friendly gesture. "This is Marcus Webb. He's interested in our services for his import business." Marcus Webb was a thin man in his 50s, with the kind of tan that suggested either expensive vacations or outdoor labor. His handshake was firm, but brief, and his eyes had the calculating look of someone always measuring angles. "David speaks very highly of your firm," Webb said, "particularly your discretion with complex international transactions." Michael felt his mouth go dry. "We focus primarily on domestic investment strategies and retirement planning." "Of course," Webb smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "David mentioned you're very conservative in your approach." "That's exactly what I need for my business." The conversation felt like a landmine field, every word potentially explosive. Michael excused himself as soon as politely possible, leaving David to handle whatever illegal arrangement he was clearly negotiating at his own wedding reception. In the bathroom, Michael splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the honest, straightforward person Sarah had fallen in love with. That man wouldn't have found himself in this situation. That man would have noticed when his business partner started laundering money. That man would have gone to the police the moment he discovered the truth. When he returned to the reception, he found Tom waiting near the bar, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. "You look like you need this," Tom said, offering one of the drinks. "And you look like hell, if I'm being honest." Wedding stress," Michael deflected, but Tom's expression suggested he wasn't buying the explanation. "Mike, I've been watching you all day. You're jumpy, distracted, and you keep looking at David Chen like he's about to pull a gun. What's going on? For a moment, Michael teetered on the edge of confession. Tom was his brother, a police officer, someone who might understand the impossible position David had maneuvered him into. But then he thought about Sarah, laughing with her aunts across the room, glowing with happiness on what was supposed to be the best day of her life. Nothing's wrong, he lied, just overwhelmed by everything. Tom studied his face with those sharp detective's eyes. You know you can tell me anything, right? Whatever's happening, we can fix it. There's nothing to fix, Michael insisted, just as the band leader announced it was time for the first dance. Sarah appeared at his side, her face luminous with joy. Ready to dance with your wife, Mr. Harrison? As they moved onto the dance floor and the opening notes of At Last began to play, Michael held Sarah close and tried to memorize every detail of this moment. Her perfume, the softness of her hand in his, the way she looked at him like he was her entire world. Because he knew that once the truth came out, she would never look at him that way again. The dancing had been going on for 2 hours when Michael noticed Tom deep in conversation with Detective Rodriguez near the bar. Their body language, Tom's straight posture, Rodriguez's serious expression, the way they kept glancing toward the head table, made Michael's blood run cold. He excused himself from a conversation with Sarah's college advisor and made his way across the dance floor, trying to appear casual despite the panic building in his chest. As he approached, he caught fragments of their conversation that confirmed his worst fears. Financial crimes investigation, Rodriguez was saying in low tones. Several firms in the Hartford area have been flagged for suspicious international transfers. Tom spotted Michael approaching and smoothly changed the subject. Michael, Detective Rodriguez was just telling me about a case he's working on. Sounds like some white-collar criminals are about to have a very bad day. Rodriguez studied Michael with the kind of professional assessment that made innocent people feel guilty. Your brother tells me you run a financial consulting firm, Harrison and Chen, right? With David Chen. That's right, Michael managed, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Interesting business, financial consulting. Lots of complex regulations, lots of opportunities for creative interpretations of the law. Rodriguez's tone was conversational, but there was steel underneath. I'm sure you keep very careful records of all your transactions. Of course, Michael replied. We're very thorough with our documentation. What he didn't mention was that most of the documentation had been falsified by David, bearing Michael's digital signature on transactions he'd never authorized or even seen. I'm sure you are, Rodriguez said, then turned back to Tom. I should get going. Thanks for the chat, Detective Harrison, and congratulations on your brother's wedding. Beautiful ceremony. As Rodriguez walked away, Tom grabbed Michael's arm. We need to talk. Now. They stepped onto the country club's terrace, where the October evening air was cool and sharp. String lights twinkled in the trees, and they could hear the muffled sounds of the reception continuing inside. But Michael felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Rodriguez isn't here as a guest, Tom said without preamble. He's here because Harrison and Chen is under federal investigation for money laundering. He wanted to get a look at you in person before they move to the next phase. Michael's knees nearly buckled. Tom, Whatever you're about to say, think very carefully, Tom interrupted, his detective instincts fully engaged. Because as your brother, I want to help you. But as a police officer, I have obligations if you confess to committing federal crimes. For a moment, they stood in silence while Michael wrestled with the decision that would determine the rest of his life. Inside the reception, Sarah was probably wondering where he'd gone. Her father might be preparing his toast. The photographer was likely looking for them to capture more moments from what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. David's been laundering money through our business accounts, Michael said finally, the words feeling like stones falling from his mouth. He used my credentials, my signature, my licenses. He created shell companies and processed illegal transactions, and he made sure that legally I'm responsible for all of it. Tom's expression darkened. How long have you known? 3 months. I found out 3 months ago, and I've been trying to figure out how to handle it without destroying everything. 3 months? Tom's voice rose slightly. Michael, you've known about federal crimes for 3 months and you said nothing? You got married tonight knowing that your business is about to be shut down and you're likely facing prison time? He threatened to destroy Sarah's family if I went to the authorities, Michael said desperately. Her father's business has contracts with some of the clients David's been working with. David said he'd make it look like the Mitchells were involved too. Jesus Christ, Mike. Tom ran his hands through his hair, pacing the small terrace. Do you understand what you've done? By waiting 3 months, by not reporting this immediately, you've made yourself look guilty of conspiracy. The prosecution will argue that you were a willing participant who only got cold feet. Through the ballroom windows, they could see David Chen raising a champagne glass, preparing to give his best man speech. His smile was perfect, his posture confident, the image of a successful businessman celebrating his partner's wedding. There's more, Michael said quietly. Sarah's pregnant. She doesn't know that I know, but I saw the test in her purse yesterday. She's probably planning to tell me on our honeymoon. The full scope of the disaster was becoming clear. Sarah would be raising their child while her husband sat in federal prison. The Mitchell family's reputation would be destroyed by association. Rebecca's business would suffer. James's retirement would be consumed by legal bills and scandal. You have to turn yourself in tonight, Tom said firmly. Rodriguez is probably getting warrants right now. If you cooperate, if you provide evidence against David and the people he's been working with, you might get a reduced sentence. But every minute you wait makes it worse. I can't do that to Sarah. Not tonight, not on our wedding night. You already did it to Sarah, Tom said harshly. You did it 3 months ago when you chose to protect yourself instead of doing the right thing. The only question now is whether you're going to compound the damage or try to minimize it. Inside, the band was playing The Way You Look Tonight, and through the windows they could see Sarah dancing with her father, her face glowing with happiness as James spun her around the dance floor. She had no idea that in a few hours, her perfect wedding day would become the last good memory she'd have for a very long time. Michael watched his wife dance and realized that Tom was right. The damage was already done. The only choice now was whether to face it with whatever dignity he had left or wait for the federal agents to drag him away in handcuffs in front of everyone he loved. The wedding reception was in full swing when the federal agents arrived. Michael had been watching the entrances for the past hour, knowing that Tom's advice to turn himself in immediately was sound, but unable to find the strength to destroy Sarah's perfect day voluntarily. Special Agent Patricia Coleman entered the Westfield Country Club ballroom with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to disrupting elegant gatherings. She was accompanied by 2 other agents and Detective Rodriguez, their presence causing a ripple of confusion among the wedding guests. Sarah noticed them first while cutting the cake with Michael. Her smile faltered as she recognized the unmistakable authority in their bearing. "Michael," she whispered, "who are those people?" Michael's mouth went dry. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it was happening, all his planned explanations crumbled. Agent Coleman approached the head table, her badge visible but held discreetly. "Michael Harrison, I'm Special Agent Coleman with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you." The ballroom gradually fell silent. Rebecca Mitchell pushed through the crowd, her face tight with controlled panic. "Is there some kind of problem, Agent Coleman?" "And yes, ma'am, there is a significant problem." The agent turned back to Michael. "Mr. Harrison, we have warrants to arrest you on charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, and violations of the Bank Secrecy Act." Sarah's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No mistake, Mrs. Harrison. Your husband's business has been processing illegal financial transactions for several months." "That's impossible," Sarah said firmly, moving protectively closer to Michael. "My husband runs a legitimate financial consulting business." Sarah, Michael said quietly, finally finding his voice. And there's something I need to tell you. The words he'd been dreading for 3 months came spilling out in front of 200 wedding guests. He explained about discovering David's illegal activities, about the threats and manipulation, about the 3 months of silence that had made him appear complicit in crimes he'd never intended to commit. As he spoke, Sarah's expression changed from confusion to disbelief, to something that looked like grief. She was watching the man she'd married transform before her eyes, from the honest person she'd fallen in love with into a stranger who had built their entire relationship on deception. "You knew about this for 3 months?" she asked when he finished. "You knew when you proposed to me? You knew when we planned this wedding?" "Sarah, I can explain. You can explain how you've been lying to me for 3 months. How you let my parents spend tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding when you knew you were about to be arrested." Agent Coleman stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, I need to place you under arrest." "Wait," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the formal proceedings. She turned to Michael with tears streaming down her face, but her expression was steel. "When did you find out exactly? What date?" "March 15th, Michael admitted. Sarah's face crumpled. "March 15th. The day after my birthday." She pulled off her wedding ring and set it carefully on the head table. "I can't do this. I can't be married to someone who could lie to me every single day for 3 months. Michael was handcuffed and led away while guests stood in stunned silence. The celebration that had begun with such joy was over, leaving only the debris of shattered trust and broken dreams. The Connecticut spring morning was crisp as Sarah Mitchell, she'd legally returned to her maiden name, walked up the courthouse steps for Michael's sentencing hearing. At 6 months pregnant, she moved carefully, one hand resting protectively on her growing belly. She hadn't spoken to Michael since their wedding night, though his lawyer had passed along several requests for visits that she'd declined. Today would be the first time they'd been in the same room since federal agents led him away in handcuffs. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial. Michael's cooperation had helped dismantle David Chen's money laundering network, resulting in 17 arrests. David himself had fled to a non-extradition country the night of the wedding, leaving Michael to face the consequences alone. Sarah took a seat in the back, her presence causing a stir among reporters covering the case. The story of the groom arrested at his own wedding reception had captured national attention. Michael looked thinner as the bailiff led him to the defendant's table. When he turned to survey the courtroom, his eyes found Sarah immediately, and the pain in his expression was so raw that she had to look away. Judge Patricia Hendricks reviewed the sentencing documents methodically before addressing the court. "Mr. Harrison, you've pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering. Your cooperation has been noted, as has the fact that you were initially a victim of your partner's deception." Michael stood, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yes, Your Honor. However, your decision to remain silent for 3 months after discovering the illegal activities shows a serious lack of judgment and moral courage. I sentence you to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. 3 years, Sarah calculated quickly. Their child would be walking and talking before Michael was released. After the proceedings, Michael's attorney approached Sarah. "He'd like to speak with you if you're willing." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They were led to a conference room where Michael sat alone. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Pregnancy suits you." "Michael, don't," Sarah said, maintaining the distance the table provided. "I'm sorry, not just for the money laundering. I'm sorry for taking away your choice. You should have been able to decide whether to marry me with all the facts." Sarah touched her belly. "I'm having a girl, in case you wondered." Michael's composure cracked. "Sarah, please. She's my daughter too. When you get out, you can petition for visitation rights like any other absent father," Sarah said firmly. "But you need to understand something, Michael. The man I married died on our wedding night. I don't know who you are anymore." She stood to leave, then paused. "I loved you so much that I would have stood by you through anything if you just told me the truth. but you didn't trust me enough to let me make that choice. That's what I can't forgive." As Sarah walked away, Michael remained at the table, understanding finally that some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, and some secrets are too destructive to survive. Their daughter would know her father's name, but she would grow up understanding that love without trust is just another beautiful lie.